on to the next talk. I think that's from Supratim Ray at the India Institute of Science in Bangalore. And the title is Spatial Spread and Stimulus Selectivity of Brain Signals Across Scales. Comparison of spikes, local field potential, and electrocorticogram.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Gaute?
Yes.
Am I? Okay.
Loud and clear.
All right. Can you see the screen and my mouse?
Everything is fine. Perfect.
Wonderful. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me. This is wonderful experience. So I'm going to tell you about our efforts to record from multiple scales. My lab is interested in, understanding the mechanisms of attention, and we are focused. Our focus is on a particular oscillation, or gamma oscillation. You also heard about yesterday. That's related to a lot of high-level cognition. So you can study that using EEG, and we do that. But the problem is that the signal is very coarse. So we also record from monkeys, and in monkeys we can put these microelectrode arrays. And a long-term sort of goal of my lab is to make a bridge between these scales. So to do that, we record from different types of electrodes. So this is one scale between the two ends that I showed. This is ECOG, which is usually done in, recorded from people suffering from epilepsy. So we have a setup where we can simultaneously record both microelectrode and ECOG data using this hybrid array that I'm going to tell you about. And on this monkey, after putting all of this, we also record EEG. So we record from all the four scales, spikes, LFP, ECOG, and EEG simultaneously. And we also do human EEG. So I'm going to tell you three short stories. The first two are related to this setup that I discussed. And finally, I'm going to spend some time talking about how to, my 2 cents about how to build this bridge to understand high-level cognition. Okay, so on to the first part. So I'm going to talk about spatial spread because it's a, topic of a lot of interest. If you put an electrode, what's the area around it that contributes to the signal? That's what we mean by spatial spread. And a nice analogy that is often given is that you drop a microphone in a stadium, and then how far can you be from the stadium and still hear the sound? So this has been a very controversial topic. Some people suggest that it's quite local. So you're only listening to maybe about 500 microns around the microelectrode. And others suggest that it's not local. In fact, they say, local field potential should be called field potential because it's not local. So Gaute, in fact, had a very nice paper where they sort of reconciled the effects by suggesting that the overall cortical spread actually depends on the correlation in the population. Imagine all the people in the stadium singing all at once, and then you can be quite far and still hear the sound. And if that's not the case, then you have to, so the spread actually depends on correlations. And that's a nice idea, but I think one important point here is that the spatial spread actually depends on two types of things. One that depends on the electrode that you're recording from, its impedance, size, and so on. And also, the properties of the cortical tissue, like the correlations that we just talked about. And in fact, it might be a good idea to sort of try to decouple the two. The reason is that, if you don't do it, first of all, your spatial spread is going to be dependent on many factors. And this is not just correlation between neurons, it's also going to depend on, the stimulus size, connectivity, so on. And it's not going to be, an easy measure. The other thing is, if you look at the extracellular matrix, it's actually thought to be largely resistive. I know there's some debate on this, but if that is the case, then, as your correlations increase, it's not just the LFP, even the MUA, which is the high frequency content of the signal, is also going to be not local anymore. And those are things that, sort of suggest that we should look for a measure which is sort of dependent on the properties of the microphone and not so much on the activated population. So this is not our idea. This was proposed by Zing and colleagues, Bob Shapley's lab. They said that, okay, I'm going to think of my spatial spread of the LFP is like a filter. So this is sigma C LFP, and it's essentially gets convolved with the activated population to give the total spread. And if you think of all of them as Gaussians, then the total variance is just going to be the variance of this activated area and the sigma C LFP, as I'm going to show you next. Okay, so now let me just describe how we can use this model to estimate the spatial spread. This is what we typically do in the lab. A monkey stares right at the center of the screen while we present very small stimuli at different positions on the screen and ask which are the positions that elicit a response. And this is how you would get the receptive field of a neuron. And then let's say you find this sort of a map, you fit a Gaussian and it's a quarter of a degree. So that's the visual spread. That's what you see on the screen. How do you convert it to the cortical spread, which we want in millimeters? One simple strategy is to just multiply it. Well, not the simple, that's the strategy. You multiply it with what is called the magnification factor, which is the millimeter of cortex per degree of visual field. It's a number that depends on the eccentricity. If you have an array of recordings like what we had, you can actually measure this. This is the slope of this, diagram that you see here. And it's about 2.5 millimeters per degree. You multiply the two, cortical spread of the LFP is now 560 microns. Okay, and this is the overall spread that I mentioned. If you assume that the cortical spread is just MF multiplied by the visual spread. But as I had discussed earlier, this is Bob Shapley's earlier paper, Zing and colleagues. They suggest that it's actually not that. It's actually sigma LFP C LFP squared plus a bunch of other terms, which determine how the activity is spreading in the cortex. And the problem is these are things that are hard to estimate. So what are you going to do? This is not easy to estimate. So how do I truly estimate sigma C LFP? So the solution was also provided by them. And the idea is that you look at two different measures, in this case, LFP and MUA. Both of them are going to be inflated, but they'll be inflated by the same amount because this term here is constant. So you can actually define sigma C LFP as a difference in the visual spreads of LFP and MUA. Okay. And you assume some value of MUA. It doesn't matter what that value is because it's a small term in that. If you do that, in this example, you had a 0.23 degree spread of the LFP, a 0.19 degree spread of MUA. Now, when you compute sigma C LFP this way, it's about 400 microns. It's about 30% less than what we had earlier. Okay, so it's not a big change. If you're unhappy with the model, doesn't really matter that much in grand scheme of things. But nonetheless, in this way, if I estimate the cortical spread of LFP, it's going to be 400 microns. Okay, so now this was the stuff that they did. This is what we wanted to do. We wanted to find out the spatial spread of ECOG. And this is not just, scientific curiosity per se. It has a very direct clinical relevance. You want, if a surgeon sees some seizure-related activity, the surgeon wants to know how much of part of the brain should he or she cut out, right? So this is a very important question. And, if you wanted to use that model for LFP, you put a microelectrode and you get both MUA and LFP. So you can do that. With ECOG, you just get one thing, the ECOG, right? So to do this, we realized that we had to record from two scales simultaneously. So we built this customized grid with the help of AdTech and BlackRock. It had a microelectrode and an ECOG grid simultaneously referenced to the same wire. It was a very challenging project for us. We were a very young lab. So Agrita was a PhD student, took up this challenge, Agrita and Siddharth. And we also had a very capable vet to help us out. So this is what we did. You can take this elastic out here and punch the electrode, microelectrode array, which are then surrounded by ECOG, and you simultaneously get those recordings. So this is a data slide. You know, I'm showing you the spreads of MUA and LFP recorded from one microelectrode, shown in green and red, and one ECOG electrode whose receptive field was near to the microelectrode array. Okay, and much to our surprise, what we found is that even though the ECOG is really much bigger than the microelectrode, you know, the ECOG diameter is 2.3 millimeters. The microelectrode is a few microns. So the ECOG spread obviously was supposed to be larger. This is the visual spread I'm talking about, but it wasn't larger by a whole amount. It was only twice the spread of the LFP. And we did this in many, you know, so this is now data recorded from 5 monkeys. In each monkey, you could only put a few ECOG electrodes because, you know, the ECOG electrodes are quite big. This is the summary. I'm showing you the cortical spreads with or without the model. So, and the important numbers are right here. The cortical spread of LFP is about 0.5 millimeter. You assume that the diameter is twice the sigma, you know, it's easy to remember. It's like a rule of 1. LFP spread is 1 mm. The ECOG spread is only thrice of that. It's only 3 mm. In fact, ECOG spread is not too different from the ECOG diameter plus the LFP spread. So that's one thing to remember. If you've got an ECOG diameter of, you know, X mm, just add 1 to it, and that's going to be your ECOG spread. We haven't tested it for different diameters, but that's what we expect. Okay, so both LFP and ECOG are quite local by this analysis. Even if you don't include the model, which means you just multiply the visual spread with the magnification factor, you're only off by a factor of 30% for the LFP and like 10% for ECOG. So actually at the end of the day, the model didn't make much of a difference. Okay, so here's another way to show the same thing. This is by comparing the power spectral densities of LFP versus ECOG. So this is something we had observed earlier also. I was a postdoc in John Mansell's lab, that ECOGs have steeper slopes between 10 to 100 hertz. Okay, so the slope of the ECOG is steeper as compared to LFP. But at higher frequencies, it's about the same. So it's, you know, it's becomes steeper and then sort of flattens out. Why is this the case? Actually, the answer is not too hard. If you look at the coherence, which is a measure of phase consistency across electrode pairs in the LFP, the coherence actually falls between sort of 10 to 100 hertz, and then it sort of flattens out. This gray, you know, this colored trace here is for 2 electrodes that are separated by you know, a few millimeters. So now that means that if you look at the lower frequencies, they are all going to be more or less in phase. Higher frequencies, about 100 hertz or so, will be more or less out of phase. Okay, so now let's think of the simplest possible ECOG model that, you know, that you can think of. We just average a bunch of LFPs and consider that as our ECOG. These are simultaneously recorded LFPs. What do we expect? At lower frequencies, if I average a bunch of LFPs, I pretty much get the same signal back because all the LFPs were in phase. They were, you know, in sync, so averaging doesn't do anything. At 100 hertz, because the phases are random, there will be more cancellation. But then because the coherence sort of flattens out, this drop is going to be about the same afterwards. So this sort of explains what the ECOG PSD is supposed to be. What is nicer is now you can take LFPs of different grid sizes and say, how is the slope of this averaged, you know, this 3x3 or 7x7 array compare against the true ECOG signal. So we did that, and we were happy to see that as you average more and more LFPs, the spectral density actually narrows, becomes steeper. And if you average about 50 electrodes, it becomes about the same as the ECOG. And if you now compute, these microelectrode arrays are 400 microns apart. The width of the array that you need to average is again about 3 cross 3 millimeters. Okay, so this is no stimulus here. This is baseline power spectral density, and you get an alternate measure, which is about the same, which is 3 millimeters. Okay, so LFP is local and ECOG is also local. That's the first part of the talk. So now I'm going to tell you about stimulus tuning properties, and these again tell you pretty much the same story, at least the part I'm going to tell you about. Essentially what we did was we showed this monkey gratings of different types. We changed the orientation, contrast, a bunch of other things, and we compared the tuning of LFP and ECOG. And I'll give you the answer straight away that the tuning is very similar between LFP and ECOG. The most surprising bit was as follows for us. We varied the stimulus size. So you show a monkey a small stimulus and then a progressively larger stimulus up to 9.6 degrees here. What do you expect as far as the firing rates are concerned? Firing rates go down, because of surround suppression. Not surprising. What about the LFP or the ECOG? So we looked at the high gamma power of the LFP, which is thought to reflect the firing rate around the microelectrode. And now notice that there are two opposing effects here. Firing rates are decreasing. So if high power, gamma power reflects firing rates, that should also decrease. But as the stimulus size increases, a larger brain area is also activated. It's like there's more activation, but the activation itself is less. So if the LFP and the ECOG is truly local, then high gamma should basically reflect the firing rate and also go down with size. But if it is global, then it should actually increase because it's getting input from larger brain population that is getting activated. So what we found, not to that much surprise, that the LFP power decreased because LFP is, thought to be quite local. But even for ECOG, it decreases. A 0.3 degree stimulus, which is a really small stimulus, produces more high gamma than larger stimuli. You won't see this if you were, for example, recording EEG. As the stimulus size increases, the EEG response increases. Okay, so here's another story. We asked, well, how informative were LFP and ECOG signals? So we showed the monkey a bunch of natural images. This was the work done by Siddharth. So there are, 80 different images, 5 different classes, and we measured the information content in the LFP and ECOG signals, as well as compared this to spiking activity. And we were thinking that maybe they will be comparable, LFPs and ECOGs. Much to our surprise, what we found is that the ECOG is actually beating everyone else, including LFPs, shown here in magenta, and spikes, shown here in this black triangle. Information is computed as a function of frequency, and the most informative frequencies are in the gamma range. So ECOGs are cool, they're quite informative, very local. They have excellent tuning properties, they're quite cool. So that's the second part. I've got 2 more minutes left. So I'll tell you a little bit about our attempts to build a bridge across scales. So if you look at this setup that we have here, I think of it as one end of a much bigger setup, where you can look at rodents and, you have a lot of cellular tools, optogenetics, imaging, etc. So if you want to study circuits, this is where you ought to be. This is the best place, I think, to study circuits. But once you try to go back to the human side, which important endeavor, you don't have access to a lot of, tools here. You have access to these core signals like ECOG and EEG, and you can just study some reflections or signatures of the circuit mechanisms. And this is, I think, where the modeling has to play a big role, putting these circuits together and making predictions about what these reflections should be. But now the question is, how can you really probe these circuits? And this is where this idea that I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is that I think that it's important to hit the brain with a stimulus which produces a very nice reflection of the underlying circuitry. And this reflection should be observed at the level of the macro signals. So one thing that we saw yesterday in Lihui's talk was this flickering stimulus.
It's
also
10
called
minutes, 10 minutes, Suppi.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll be done in 4 minutes. So I have practiced this, so I'll finish in 4. SSVP, it's a steady state, a flickering response. You flicker at 40 Hertz, you get a response peak at 40 Hertz. That's what we saw yesterday. But I'm going to actually emphasize on a different hammer, a very nuanced hammer, which is generated by just presenting stimuli like what you are seeing here. These are what are called gratings. You don't have to flicker those. Even if I show you a static grating like this, in the visual cortex, you will often see this very nice buildup of activity between 30 to 70 Hertz called the gamma rhythm. And the reason I'm saying that it's a very nuanced hammer, because if I change the properties of this stimulus, gamma is actually going to change in very predictable and very interesting ways. So I'm going to walk you through some of the examples. So suppose you make the stimulus larger. So you've got a little hammer and then a big hammer. What you find is that the gamma becomes stronger and slower. It slows down and becomes very prominent. Many people have shown this, Gieselman and Thiele, Shoshan Jia, and so on, from Adam Cohn's lab. Now, here's a case where you have the same sized hammer, but you are hitting it harder. You're increasing the contrast of the stimulus. And gamma responds by speeding up, and the size, the magnitude also increases. If you increase change the contrast over time, this is essentially increasing the contrast and luminance and then increasing. So this is a counter phasing stimulus. Look at what is happening in gamma oscillations. It's doing an FM modulation. So it can actually change its properties very quickly. If you speed up if you drift the grating and speed up the drifting rate, gamma speeds up, to a particular extent, and then it sort of vanishes. Okay, more recently, this was much to our surprise, we found that if you show different colors to the monkey, this is just a full screen of different colors that you are seeing here, you get intense gamma for reddish hues. And there are 2 other labs who have now found the same thing. This is 10 times stronger than the strongest gamma that you can get with a achromatic grating. So gamma is a very sort of nuanced, very interesting signal, which is reflecting a lot of interesting circuit level properties. And it's interesting because it's thought to be generated by the interplay of excitation and inhibition. And there are lots of mechanisms in the brain that depend on such interactions: gain control, normalization, adaptation, and so on. So this is a rhythm that can be used potentially to probe these mechanisms very well. Now, the nice part is that gamma is also visible at the level of EEG. This is where I sort of started this part, where I said that you can move up to the level of EEG and still see this. Here's gamma recorded from EEG, nicely localized in the occipital area. We compared gamma in EEG versus LFP and compared stimulus tuning. It's not as robust as in the LFP, but it's there, and it's quite prominent, the gamma in EEG. So I'm just going to wrap up by telling you one little story which we did. You may ask, is it any use? Is gamma in EEG of any use? So we recorded gamma from elderly subjects who came and viewed a screen while we recorded EEG. It was a large study, and we asked, and later on, some of these subjects were turned out to be either MCI or AD. At the time of recording, we didn't know that. So this was a very surprising finding for us. What you are looking at is the gamma response for the healthy controls, age and gender matched controls of the MCI and AD subjects. And you see gamma. What about the MCI and AD subject themselves? there's hardly any gamma. Okay, and it's a reduction very localized to the gamma range. It ties in well with the idea that Hui was mentioning yesterday. So it's a very nuanced probe of cortical activity, which also gets compromised if you have a mental disorder. Okay, so to build the bridge, these are my 2 cents. Gaute said I should talk about something that maybe excites the modelers. And my 2 cents would be that, if we think of circuit mechanisms that generate these oscillations and also change these oscillations, we actually can learn a lot about the circuit. Okay, with that, I will end my talk and thank the people in the lab who have done all the work and also the funding. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So, yeah, we have time for some questions. And one I can start with one I could maybe ask myself even. It's from Joaquin Rapella. Have you tried to use a biophysically detailed model to predict both LFP and ECOG?
No, but I have, I'm going to collaborate with Gaute and we are going to do that together. So I haven't done that. To my knowledge, there are no very detailed models that replicate all these gamma, these interesting gamma variations. The ones that I'm familiar with are done by Terry Sanowski, for example, this Jadi and Sanowski, and then Bob Shapley has these models, but they only, they're not that exhaustive, they are, complexity is less. And, that's the hope that we will have models that can actually tell you all about these gamma modulations as well. Thank you.
And that's one from Daniel Felleman. How does spread depend on cortical layer, cortical modules, architecture, and cortical state? If a state can modulate this.
Yeah, so we haven't done this, but Xing et al. Actually measured the cortical spread as a function of distance, this cortical depth. And they said that the spread, and they use that model that, it's from the same paper. So the cortical spread decreases in the input layers, but it's not that much. In their estimate, it was like 220 microns versus 350 or so. So there is some reduction. Now, ideally speaking, it shouldn't matter, if you are using this measure that sort of compares across 2 different measures to get to the cortical state, you are sort of trying to rule out factors that change these things. So with activation or, the stimulus size or, the state, you expect different measures to change in similar ways. So the filtering function itself, which is largely the property of the microelectrode, shouldn't change that much. At least that's what we expect.
Here's one from modeler Artemio Soto Brejeda. Supra team, is your data publicly available by any chance? I would be very interested in accessing some of the recordings for a model on which I'm working.
Right now it's not. At some point we do we are committed to that. At some point we'll make it available. So all of this just came out this year, a lot of this work. So in future, yes, we would like to make it publicly available, but right now it's not.
Okay. Then a final one from Stephanie. Very nice talk, thank you. Are the gamma responses you're observing with static visual stimulation sustained on single trial? Or do they emerge as transient bursts? If bursts, how long
yes. So we have a paper on that also. So it's a 2018 Journal of Neurophysiology paper, Subhash Chandran et al. We spent a lot of time figuring out whether it's bursty or not. So it is bursty, as also shown by a lot of other people. I should mention though that our method is different, because the signal processing techniques that are used, the spectral estimator that is used to measure the burst, there are some really serious issues with that. The spectral estimator happens to be very noisy. So the paper that I'm mentioning actually comes up with a way of measuring the burst length without going in the frequency domain, using a technique called matching pursuit. So that's, it's more of a signal processing paper. But yes, we have measured, and like what you showed yesterday and what Bob Shapley has shown, and other people have shown, it tends to be in shorter bursts. The median is about 100 milliseconds. So 4 or 5 cycles. Occasionally you get longer bursts of about 300 milliseconds, but the median is about